We are live.
We are like, okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Friday, February 17th, 2023 at 9:05 in the morning. We generally use this 9 to 9:30 time slot to hear from our legislative interns from UVM. So good morning, Ben. Good morning, Ali. Thank you for joining us this morning, and look forward to hearing your reports.
Good morning, Ben Donsbach, legislative intern, UVM. Yeah, sorry we can't be there in person. Fortunately, we got some freezing rain in Burlington right now and black ice mornings. But yeah, we'll be there next week. Hopefully, the weather is a little bit nicer. So I got some important stuff to cover today. I'll start out with just something that came up in the Social Equity Caucus meeting yesterday. Near the end, they got on the topic of the Vermont Undeserved Community Index, which is, I know, something that your committee worked on. And there was concern raised by a member of the caucus, Reverend Mark Hughes, that there was an unequal divide between the focus on rural communities and urban communities. And he had concerns that, minority communities and we're not going to have enough attention paid to them because of this index, and that essentially he was saying that he was concerned that systematic racism was in some ways being promoted because of economic divides along the lines of rural communities getting more attention than urban communities. There was discussion about this in the committee. They assured him that in the caucus, they assured him that this was not the case. They were making sure that all underserved communities were addressed. And, there was also concern about the governor's intention with this index. But as I said, the caucus was adamant that the index was going to be used effectively and equally across all communities. So just one discussion I thought I'd bring to your attention. And then I did take some notes on economic development.
Ben, I'm just going to jump in for a second because I was at the Social Equity Caucus last night. You might have heard me. I was trying to explain that Commerce was trying to add some scrutiny onto the index, and it wasn't going to be a catch-all used forevermore. And there was this, I can't remember now, budget adjustment feels like 4 years ago, but that we put in some language to really know how it's being utilized, et cetera. And Susanna Davis, who is the Director of Racial Equity, you probably heard her as well. The hybrid nature of that caucus is super hard. So if you're watching it on Zoom or on YouTube, you may have not heard her, but she was just also talking about, she had some early involvement in that index development, which I don't think we knew here. So she offered some helpful insights around just, there's been a lot of engagement about pointing those points out. Not to say it's perfect, of course, but it was helpful to hear Susanna's piece of that. So I didn't know that. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
No. Thank you so much for adding that. I heard her speaking, but yeah, the audio quality in those Zoom meetings is not always the best. So I didn't get the full statement from her. So thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, so I did take some notes on economic development this week. If I have some time, I might touch on them at the end, but it was mainly on this housing bill and budget adjustment act. So I'm going to focus on the report that I summarized this week. If you are interested in those notes, Andrew has them as always. So they are there. But I know this is a report that is pretty important to the work you guys are doing right now. It was actually a 2016 report. It was the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive Technical Working Group review. And so basically the Act 157 in 2016 created a technical working group to answer 4 key questions about Vermont Growth Incentive, or Vermont Employment Growth Incentive. And these 4 questions are what make up the report. Essentially, they break it down by each question and then provide feedback on what they think could be done to address this. They break down the details of each issue in question. I decided to focus on what the working group was recommending. I felt like that would be the most important to you, so I'll start going through those. The first question is whether the cost-benefit model is being effectively utilized. So the working group identified the most direct objective of the cost benefit model as the estimation of theoretical net fiscal impacts, and the model is structurally aligned with this. A complete annual compilation of changes resulting from model updates was proposed by the JFO and was endorsed by the working group. And the working group also anticipated that technical discussion between Veggie Manager and the legislative state economists would continue in order to support the Joint Fiscal Committee's understanding of proposed changes and their impacts. The working group determined that the model is effective in providing an estimate of theoretical changes in state revenue, but as the cost benefit model does not identify the appropriate incentive amount, the working group determined that there was no effective model in place to make these determinations. The second question that was being answered was should the inputs of the cost benefit model be adjusted for those applicants who assert that but for the incentive, the scale or timing of the project would change. So essentially, the but for was a part of the model in which it affirms that the proposed projects would not occur in Vermont, but or would occur in a less than desirable manner, but for the incentive award of the Veggie program. The assumptions that the cost benefit models make are not in line with the but for language. The model overstates the benefits of projects occurring in a different manner without an incentive because it is assuming that no activity occurs without an incentive and is unable to measure how different or how less desirable a project would be. Two options were discussed by the working group, which included replacing the model's control baseline forecast with a custom adjusted alternative baseline forecast, and removing the but for language, which would allow the projects that would not happen in whole to qualify for, which would only allow the projects that would not happen in whole to qualify for the incentive award. So, if they would partially occur but not at the full capability, they would not qualify for the incentive award. Neither of these suggestions was fully supported. The first one, which was the the alternative baseline forecast, would add too much administrative and applicant complexity, and the removing the but for language would cause a decline in applications. So the third question was, in addition to or in place of industry-specific background growth rates, can the program integrate the use of business-specific background growth rates as well as methods to review, calculate, and set rates for industry-specific background growth rates if they are recommended? The working group expressed three concerns about the background growth rate. The first was that a small number of firms can have a lot of influence on the growth differential between industries, which can create a volatility in these differentials. The second concern was that there was variation between historical long-term differentials and future industry growth differentials. And the third concern was that there was larger firms may be disadvantaged by any uses of growth differentials. The working group did not reach a unanimous recommendation. However, there were ideas thrown around that were mentioned in the report, which I thought I would add. The first was just to make no changes. The second idea that was being discussed was either to keep the current, which would have been the 2016 overall private sector background growth discount rate, or a rate that is based on the 1990 to 2015 growth rate, and apply this equally or with slight variation. And then the last recommendation was to use Bureau of Labor Statistics or Moody's Vermont state forecasts in order to generate projected future wage and salary growth for the private sector as a single discount. And then the last question that was asked was, are differential rates in annual average wages or annual average unemployment appropriate triggers for an incentive enhancement for projects located in or lower wage thresholds for jobs created in qualifying labor market areas? and our margin of error in annual labor and in annual labor market area wage and unemployment rates within an acceptable range of tolerance for this use. So the working group determined that it is appropriate for the annual average unemployment rate in assessing whether a reduced wage gap is appropriate for an eligible area. And it also determined that the use of annual average wage rates and the annual average unemployment rate to identify if an area is eligible for an enhanced award amount is reliable and is recommended. There were no technical changes proposed in this section. And that is it for the report. I see I'm at 15 minutes, so I'm not going to touch on economic development right now. Again, it's all omnibus housing budget adjustment. If you would like to look at those notes, Andrew has them, and I'll leave the rest of the time for Allie unless there are any questions.
Is there any way, do we know if any of those recommendations were taken up by BEPC and the Veggie program?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to follow up on those. I was going to track and then see if there was any newer reports and see if I could compare them and create a kind of comparison report, if that would be helpful.
Yeah. Very helpful.
How about reaching out directly to Abby? Would that be
Yeah.
helpful? You might want to do that too.
Okay. Who should I reach out to?
Abby Sherman.
Sounds good. I will do that.
She's a director of that program.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, no problem.
Good morning, committee.
Morning.
Morning, Auntie.
Allie Schaefer, Vermont or UVM legislative intern. Thanks for your flexibility this morning with our remote attendance. I have two things to go over with you, and then if there's time, some notes on a public housing hearing. First, I'm going to go over the BEAM program update from Vermont Works for Women. BEAM stands for Building Employment and Meeting. It is a 3-year pilot program funded by the Department of Corrections, allocated through Act 183 of the last legislative session. The grant amount was $300,000. The goal of this program was to offer justice-involved women employment readiness both in facility and in the community. Participants are offered stable housing, immediate employment, and support from VWW's reentry services. So the first community partner for this program is Middlebury College. They made an initial investment of $50,000 in addition to the $300,000 allocated to support the program can support 4 individuals at a time and will accept new participants on a rolling basis. So upon the release from the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, individuals are moved into housing provided by Vermont Works for Women in Middlebury and are employed at the Middlebury College dining facilities. So that's just a very brief update. I was in touch with Allison Lamanga from Vermont Works for Women, and she sent me a little 1-page briefing on this program that I'm going to share with Andrew after this meeting as well. So that's just a brief update on that program. The other thing I have for you this morning is the Attorney General's Office 2022 report on consumer privacy. This was submitted on February 9th of this year. And upon the request of Chair Marcotte, the AGO convened a meeting of stakeholders to discuss the arrangement of laws in Vermont to solidify a Biometric Information Privacy Act. The issues that were discussed were the protection of biometric data for consumers, if Vermont should adopt a policy similar to the California Privacy Act, the CCPA, and how we can have these policies better protect consumers and their privacy concerns in Vermont. So the AGO observes that privacy laws need to center the consumer. What I mean by that is many consumer privacy policies in other states protect consumers, but do not require businesses to protect consumer privacy directly. Consumers need to be informed of how their data is collected, to opt out of the sale of data, or to request that their data be deleted. Recommendations of the AGO place controls upon the entities that collect, distribute, and profit from consumer data. So these controls include data minimization to prohibit businesses from collecting more information than necessary to fulfill a transaction or retain information longer than necessary. They wish to require third parties to acquire data that comply with original consent for which the data was collected in order to limit the secondary uses of data. Additionally, they wish to enable consumers to opt out of online tracking and data broker sharing of data, doing this by codifying a do not track designation within the policy, as well as expanding the data broker law to create guardian consent, right to control sale of data, and right to be forgotten. So more on the biometric policy protection. So biometric data are derived from physical characteristics such as faces, fingertips, voices, retinas, even walking gait or how we type. The first BIPA Act was introduced in Illinois in 2008 and has been met with intense criticism from stakeholders in Vermont. Stakeholders in Vermont suggest that looking at the Washington State BIPA and the AGO suggests looking at best parts from both. A little bit more on the expansion of the data broker law. Data brokers should be required to provide an opt-out demand from consumers that data brokers delete their data, which is a right to be forgotten, and provide a statewide service that Vermonters can register for, and data brokers are required to monitor it, similar to a do not call it registry. Additionally, the AGO is hoping that the data brokers will disclose data breaches and security breaches. Presently, data brokers are not required to notify consumers or the Attorney General's office if a data breach occurs. So just some conclusion as well as some stakeholder responses. A BIPA that includes a private right of action and clear and specific damages, data minimization, similar to the California Consumer Protection Act. Third parties must comply with original consent, opting out of data, broker sharing of data through do not track systems, and adoption of certain provisions of the CCPA. That's what the AGO is hoping to accomplish. So a little bit on stakeholder responses. There are 8 in this report. There are 8 letters from 8 different stakeholder organizations detailing their opinions and recommendations on a BIPA for Vermont. In short, these opinions are pretty mixed. Many stakeholders are in favor of the plan outlined by the AGO, and some believe that modeling Vermont's plan after Illinois' policy is the wrong idea. A statement included by the State Privacy and Security Coalition details that including a private right of action for statutory damages would create massive class action litigation exposure for any alleged allegations of the law by commercial entities, significantly deterring the uses of biometric data, including for anti-fraud or authentication and other security purposes that benefit consumers. So essentially, the concern is that these laws will decrease the protection of consumers because they will prohibit some of these technologies that do have a benefit to consumers. That being said, there is a lot more. Yeah.
Could you take a look, because Illinois is the only law that applies a private right of action.
Yeah.
And we've heard from the AG's office that there's 117 cases pending right now that have not been thrown out. And I'm wondering if you could check to see if you could find out how many cases may have been filed in Illinois and then thrown out because they were considered frivolous and it'd be interesting for us to know, there's 117 now. So that tells us that there's something going on there that the courts feel there's merit to, but we don't know what the total amount of cases were filed. So, if there were 4,000 cases filed and there's only 117, that kind of tells us that, this thought of being frivolous is, from what we're hearing from the industry, may be true and may give us pause or want to maybe try to reel that in somewhat, or there is an issue or where consumers are not being protected and we need to really think about that. So Emma?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to look into that and have that for next week.
Ali, I have another question because as I've been thinking about this as we've been considering this bill, in either the AGO's report or just what you've researched. So a lot of our consumer protection is based on the transaction of money or services exchange and whatnot. But there is a layer of this around free services provided and then nonprofits or people who are just giving information for other reasons. They're collecting people's data. This is coming up a bit with like abortion care and access in the country and all of the changes happening in various states. And then things like period trackers, et cetera, we're collecting, in my mind, biometric data about someone who has a period and a menstrual cycle. So I'm just wondering if there was anything touched, and I will ask this more as we get deeper into it, but if there's anything that around the specifics of it, if it's all free, like if they collect that data for free, they're not selling that data, they're just giving it to whomever to track for other political reasons, frankly. Did that come up in any of the stuff that you were looking at all?
Those issues did not come up specifically, but I think this principle of limiting secondary uses kind of would touch on that.
Mm-hmm. Did it say anything about money though? Like if the first party bill, the first entity has to sell it, or there has to be money exchange?
I think I can look at that more specifically, but I believe that the data minimization is saying that a business, if it's monetary or not, the business can only use it for that intended purpose. Even if there is money exchanged, yes, they can, but they can only use it for that purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm, well, I'll keep, as I said, I'm going to keep just thinking about
Okay,
this.
yeah, I'll look
Curious.
I'll look back at it and look more closely into if there's language about monetary and
And I think it is a larger gap in our consumer protection is when it's completely free. We can't, anyway, it's a big emerging question. So
absolutely. Yeah, I hear you.
questions are, thanks.
Ali, if you want to delve more a little deeply into the report, that's good too. But if you have additional questions, Sarah Aceves is the attorney in the Attorney General's office, is the one who's been working on data privacy, who you could call.
Okay.
Some of these specific questions.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I can send you her. She's given us her cell number. If I'll send that to you.
Okay, great. I'll give her a call.
And this is really important because we are working on this bill now, so it's or we're in discussions about the bill.
Yeah, as soon as I have some things on it, I'll send it, even if it's before Friday tomorrow or next week.
I'll take 2 Fridays.
Okay.
All right, that's all I have. So thanks.
Thank you both very much again for all your work. We certainly appreciate it. Very helpful.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Yeah.
Glad to hear it.
So hopefully we'll see you next week in person.
Yes, definitely. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
It was a good choice not to drive in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got an email from my landlord saying that black ice is everywhere in Burlington right now. So yeah, it's
Yeah. In our tiny little
I know. I hope it melts by 4 o'clock when I get home.
Yeah.
Although I heard there was no delay in the Burlington school system this morning. I'm sorry, wife.
St. Albans is delayed though. There's a bunch of schools up
Yeah.
north that are all delayed, but Burlington missed it. So
They probably crawled to school because the sidewalks, tough kids. Yeah,
Just put their skates on. and-
yeah, literally.
Okay,
All right, see you
thank you
later.
both.
All right,
See you
thank
Have a good
you.
weekend.
You as
you.
well.
Take care.
Any
I'll send you-
questions, committee? Back from the floor, we're gonna hear from the number of housing advocates, and VHCB is gonna be in. We'll be able to chat with them about their program, but also find out how the $15 million revolving loan fund, how that's going, and have we got it set up again? Or is it set up yet? Okay,